Nothing can excuse the terrorist rampage by Hamas. They murdered hundreds of Israelis and made no preparations for the 2 million people of Gaza to survive the inevitable retaliation. Israel is responsible for avoidable civilian deaths and for cutting off all basic necessities for the Gaza Palestinians now under collective attack. Civilian deaths could easily rise into the tens of thousands. Well, how did it come to this? The history is long and disputed. Yet today, a structurally unsustainable, inherently explosive situation prevails. In the territories controlled by Israel since 1967, there are roughly equal numbers of Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Muslims and Christians. All 7 million Jewish Israelis have citizenship and full human and legal rights, as do the 1 million Palestinian citizens of Israel. The 5 million Palestinians under occupation don't. In a world made up of states and their citizens, the stateless Palestinians are unique because they have no citizenship in Israel and yet no state of their own. The occupation forces Israelis and Palestinians into a toxic relationship of dominance and subordination. This unnatural relationship ensures periodic outbreaks of atrocious violence. The conflict involves individual and group malice on both sides. But structures of violence are hardwired into any relationship defined by the control of one people by another in a contest for land and power. Israelis and Palestinians must stop dehumanizing each other. Hamas killed Israelis indiscriminately. Israel says it's confronting human animals in Gaza. Well, people treated like animals sometimes act like animals. It's a self-reinforcing shared pathology. Israelis and Palestinians must rehumanize each other and eventually cooperate in replacing the violent occupation and resistance with genuine coexistence. That can only be sustained between equals, humans who respect each other's full humanity, recognizing we are all no better and no worse than each other.
That was kind of cool.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington. There have been dramatic developments overnight in the Mideast as the Israelis step up air and artillery strikes, now firing missiles into southern Gaza, an area where they'd earlier urged residents to evacuate, as well as the occupied West Bank and 2 airports in Syria. There are still 500 to 600 Americans trapped in Gaza and at least 10 Americans who are unaccounted for and potentially hostages of Hamas. Plus, there are clashes at Israel's northern border with Lebanon, home to the Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah. Overnight, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin deployed additional air defense systems in response to recent attacks on U.S. troops in the region. We have a lot to get to today, but we begin in Israel with Charlie D'Agata.
The full force of Israeli airstrikes and artillery resumed overnight and this morning. And a rare airstrike in the West Bank on a suspected Hamas terror cell in Jenin. 2 weeks of heavy bombardment has left Gaza in ruins, with a death toll that surpassed 4,300 people, another 13,000 injured. There had been a brief lull with the release of American hostages Judith Ronan and her daughter Natalie from Chicago, the first and only hostages to emerge from captivity. Rescuing the rest in the middle of an expected full-scale invasion presents an unprecedented challenge, the former head of an Israeli Special Forces unit told us.
This is the responsibility of the state with 200 hostages, infants, wounded. There's no way the country can move without taking this into consideration. This will be an element in the handling of the war.
A war Israeli forces are readying more than 350,000 reservists for. What we've witnessed is a steady buildup of hundreds of thousands of Israeli troops and heavy equipment like this in staging areas, all pointed in one direction about a mile from Gaza. The stated aim of the complete destruction of Hamas means an invasion on a scale never seen here before. Former Major General Israel Ziv once commanded Israeli forces in Gaza.
We're completely changing the tactics. We're going to use a lot of fire. We don't want to play to their hands, to their traps, to whatever they prepare for us.
This morning, the Israeli spokesman said that strike on a suspected terrorist cell in Jenin eliminated what he called a ticking bomb, while the wave of attacks overnight in Gaza City resulted in the deaths of dozens of Hamas militants.
That's Charlie D'Agata reporting from Tel Aviv. Imtiaz Tayyib spent time in Ramallah over the weekend, and he is back in West Jerusalem.
Well, across the Middle East and around the world, we've seen massive demonstrations in solidarity with Palestinians. In London, over 100,000 people took to the streets of the British capital demanding an end to Israel's war in Gaza. There's also been similar scenes in Arab capitals, from Sana'a in war-torn Yemen to Cairo, where the Egyptian president Abdel Fattah al-Sisi called for a, quote, day of rage, just hours after his phone call with President Biden earlier this week. It was a phone call in which a deal was reached between Egypt, the U.S., and Israel to allow 20 trucks of desperately needed humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, which started arriving only yesterday. On the Israeli-occupied West Bank, the violence there is only getting worse. We were at one protest where we witnessed Israeli snipers shoot at least 3 Palestinians. Now, earlier, we spoke with Mustafa Barghouti, the president of the Palestinian National Initiative and a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council since 2006.
I'm shattered. I'm angry, mainly because I don't understand why this all should happen. But what breaks my heart so much is the suffering of civilians, whether Palestinian or Israeli. And what I don't understand, why the President of the United States comes here and instead of telling Israel enough is enough, you wanted to respond, you responded, you already killed 4,000 Palestinians, stop. Instead of that, he's encouraging them to have an invasion, a ground invasion.
Do you think President Biden's visit was a catastrophic mistake?
Catastrophic from 3 aspects. First, it was a huge political and diplomatic failure, as I told you, because nobody wanted to meet with him except Israelis. Second, it's a strategic mistake because he's dragging the United States into a very dangerous area where war crimes are committed. And third, because he is consolidating the absence of peace process.
Do you see a scenario where this ends?
Yes, one scenario. There is no other scenario. Immediate change of the behavior of Western leaders who are now participating in encouraging Netanyahu to commit these war crimes. And the United States is the only country that has the real leverage over Israel. And they should tell Israel, stop. Stop, enough. Let's have ceasefire. Let's have immediate exchange of prisoners so that all Israeli prisoners would come back home safe. And let's initiate a true peace process to solve the roots of the problem, which is occupation and the system of apartheid.
Now, efforts to create a Palestinian state have been at a standstill for years now, largely because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's successive hard-right governments have been firmly opposed to it. And while the Biden administration continues to back calls for a peace process that would lead to a two-state solution, it's done very little practically and diplomatically to advance that goal. And after Hamas's brutal attack and a looming Israeli ground war in Gaza, it's a goal that seems even further away than ever.
We go now to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is at the State Department. Good morning to you, Mr. Secretary.
Morning, Margaret. Good to be with you.
Tension is very high in the region. Are you changing your security posture? Are you pulling any U.S. personnel out of the area?
Margaret, we are concerned at the possibility of Iranian proxies escalating their attacks against our own personnel, our own people. We're taking every measure to make sure that we can defend them and, if necessary, respond decisively. Not at all what we're looking for, not at all what we want, but we'll be prepared if that's what they choose to do.
So that sounds like quite possibly pulling people out. In terms of the threat from Iran you just referenced there, President Biden in his Oval Office address said that the U.S. would hold Iran accountable. What does accountable mean?
Well, what you've seen already, Margaret, is a very clear message from the president, backed up by the deployment of two of our largest aircraft carrier battle groups, to make sure that it's clear no one should take advantage of this moment to escalate to further attacks on Israel, or for that matter, attacks on us, on our personnel. And this is not by way of, in terms of what we're doing by provocation. It's designed to deter, designed to make clear that no one should use this moment in any way to escalate.
We'll stay tuned. In terms of what's happening in Gaza, I know there are an estimated 500 to 600 Americans there. Is there any chance Israel lets some of those Americans out, or Egypt allows some of those Americans in?
You're exactly right. And to date, at least, Hamas has blocked them from leaving, showing once again its total disregard for civilians of any kind who are stuck in Gaza.
Have you asked the Israeli government to delay in order to give you more time to broker the release of these hostages?
First, step back for a second, because it's important to remember what happened. It's incredible how quickly that gets lost, because it was only a couple of weeks ago that Hamas invaded Israel with its terrorist fighters and slaughtered, and I use that word very deliberately, slaughtered so many people. Again,
Right.
Men, women, young children, babies, old people, you name it. And they continue to rain rockets down on Israel. When I was there a few days ago, we had to take shelter a couple of times because of incoming rockets from Hamas. So my point is this: no country can be expected to tolerate this, to live with this. And as we said from the start, Israel has both the right and even the obligation, not only to defend itself, but to try to make sure that, to the best of its ability, this can't happen again. So we talk to the Israelis about what they're planning. We give them our best advice. It's important, as we've said, not only what they do, but how they do it, particularly when it comes to making sure that civilians are as protected as they possibly can be in this crossfire of Hamas is making. But in terms of what we're talking to Israel about with regard to their military operations, it really is focused on both how they do it and how best to achieve the results that they seek.
So let's talk about how they do it. You're right to lay out just how absolutely horrific that attack was 2 weeks ago. Turning the page to what has happened during the following 2 weeks, UNICEF says 1,524 children have been killed in the Gaza Strip during these bombings. Why isn't the U.S. calling for at least a temporary ceasefire?
First, Margaret, when I hear the stories, when I see the pictures of young children who have lost their lives in this conflict of Hamas is making, whoever they are, wherever they are, whether they're Palestinians, whether they're Israelis, whether they're Jews or Muslims, it hits me, and I know it hits virtually everyone, right in the heart. And that's why it's so important to do everything possible to protect them, and why it's so important to do everything possible to get assistance to those who need it.
So
Food,
why not
medicine,
ask for
water.
at least a temporary pause in the bombing, as was proposed at the UN this week?
We've seen, first of all, that in order to get assistance in, we've had that happen. And you saw the first 20 trucks go in yesterday. I expect more will follow today and the day after that. We want to make sure that we have sustained delivery of food, medicine, water, the things that people need. At the same time, I said something a minute ago that we have to remember. Israel has to do everything it can to make sure this doesn't happen again. Freezing things in place where they are now would allow Hamas to remain where it is and to repeat what it's done sometime in the future. No country could accept that.
One of my colleagues who is on the ground in Israel and has traveled to the West Bank conducted an interview with Mr. Mustafa Barghouti, a Palestinian politician I'm sure you know. He said he doesn't understand why President Biden, when he was in Israel, did not say, enough is enough. You wanted to respond and you responded. You killed 4,000 Palestinians. Stop. Instead, you're encouraging a ground invasion. How do you respond to enough is enough?
Enough is enough should have been the case with Hamas 2 weeks ago. It would be good to hear the entire world speaking clearly and with one voice about the actions that Hamas took, about the slaughter of people, about the fact that that should be absolutely intolerable, unacceptable to anyone, anywhere, any country, any people. Second,
in terms of U.S. interests in the region, one of America's closest allies, the King of Jordan, gave an impassioned speech saying Palestinian lives seem to matter less than Israeli ones. Our lives matter less than other lives. The application of international law is optional, and human rights appear to have boundaries based on races and religions. That's a warning from one of America's closest friends in the region that this is a dangerous message to be sending, and it could have blowback. Are you concerned?
Margaret, every life, Palestinian, Israeli, Jewish, Muslim, Arab, every life has equal worth. When I see the reports, when I see the photographs, when I hear the stories of young children, Palestinian children, who've been killed or injured, it hits me right in the gut too. Just as it does when I see these other stories, wherever it is. We had here in our own country a little boy, 6 years old, Wadi, in Chicago, who was viciously murdered, apparently because he was a Palestinian American. A little boy, 6 years old, didn't do anything to anyone. I feel that strongly across the board, no matter where it is. But this is on Hamas. And the fact is, Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people. It doesn't represent their just cause. It doesn't represent their aspiration, and legitimate aspiration for a state of their own. On the contrary, it does everything to make life worse and more miserable.
Does the U.S. assess that it is actually possible for Israel to destroy both Hamas as an entity and its ideology? Is it actually a military possibility?
The best way, the only way to defeat an ideology, no matter how warped, and in the case of Hamas, it's about as warped as it possibly can be, is to make sure that there is a better, a clearer alternative for people. And that alternative is very clear. And it's very stark. We have, on the one hand, countries throughout the region who want to come together to integrate, to normalize relations, and to lift up the rights of the Palestinian people, to be able to have a future where they work together, go to school together, do business together, travel to each other's countries. That's one vision.
Yes.
The other vision is the vision that Hamas has: death, destruction, nihilism, darkness. Now, the responsibility that those of us who believe in the first vision have is to do everything possible to make it real, so that people not only see it, but they can achieve it. That's exactly what we were working on before this horrific attack on October 7th. And that's the vision that we need to get back to.
Okay.
But at the same time, we also have to deal with the fact that Hamas represents an active, ongoing threat, and that has to be dealt with too.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Margaret.
And Face the Nation will be back in 1 minute with former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, so stay with us. We're now joined by former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Good morning and good to have you here in person.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
Well, we've been talking about what's happening in the Middle East right now. I know you watch the region closely. President Biden counseled Netanyahu during his trip to Israel last week and repeated a certain phrase I want to play for you here in his Oval Office address.
But I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes.
And that was a nod to 9/11 and the U.S. invasion of Iraq potentially an overreach. Do you agree with that warning President Biden is issuing there, that there is the risk here of Israel taking actions that could backfire on their own security?
I think that our support and defense of Israel needs to be unwavering. I think that for the most part, that's what President Biden has demonstrated. I thought that most of the themes that he laid out in his Oval Office address were exactly right about the importance of American leadership, the importance of understanding this is a battle between the forces of freedom and the forces of tyranny and terrorism. With respect to his comments about 9/11 and post 9/11, I would say the fact that we had not a single additional terrorist attack, mass casualty terrorist attack in over 20 years now demonstrates that the steps that we took were in fact effective. And I would say the biggest mistake, frankly, post 9/11 was the hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan that President Trump started, President Biden completed. So I think we need to set our differences about those issues aside. We certainly do have them, but with respect to what's happening in the world today, I think it's crucially important for the world to see that the United States, we are united across party lines in the defense of Israel and in the importance of the destroying Hamas, and also a very strong warning that the president has issued to Iran. Yeah. And that, frankly, the Biden administration policy needs to be changed to make it consistent with the kind of warning that we've seen.
But in terms of that comment about reacting from a place of rage and unintended consequences, Secretary Blinken said the only way to defeat an ideology is by offering a better alternative. What is the better alternative for a conflict that has been going on for this many decades?
There is no notion in which this is a battle of ideologies when you look at what Hamas did. And I think that the world has moved on far too quickly from what Hamas did. Hamas slaughtered innocents. They invaded Israel and they slaughtered women and children and tortured people and raped people. And the fact that the world has moved on from that now, that is an ideology, if it even is one, of evil. And so the way to battle that is making sure that you destroy Hamas, making sure that we send a very clear message to Iran, that Iran will face severe consequences if it tries to get involved here. We also, though, need to recognize the rising anti-Semitism and the expressions of anti-Semitism that we have seen across our country and across the world since October 7th must be absolutely rejected, and the world must stand against that. So this is not a moral equivalence. This is not a peace process question. This was out and out slaughter, and we absolutely stand against that.
And CBS continues to tell those stories. So just to be clear, the journalists have not moved on. When will you make a decision about whether you want to run for president of the United States?
Well, what I am doing right now, what I will continue to do, is very much focus on making sure that we get people elected at all levels who are serious, people who believe in the Constitution. I think we're at a moment in this nation where we certainly have seen we face significant threats internationally. We've got Iran, Russia, North Korea, China arrayed against us. Yeah. This is a threat atmosphere that we have not seen certainly since the end of World War II.
Bob Gates said ever.
Right.
But yes, also said there's no presidential alternative in terms of affirmative vision for America's role in the world. Have you heard any candidates for president offer that vision?
I think that certainly you have seen some. I think that it needs to be a much louder, we need a much louder voices within both parties. Within my own party, I don't even know how I should call it my own party. Within the Republican Party right now, the extent to which you're seeing people suggest that we should abandon Ukraine, which essentially is surrendering in this battle between freedom and tyranny, and that would be very dangerous for our security.
As you know, this massive national security package can't pass until there's a Speaker of the House.
Correct.
Last month, you said Congressman Patrick McHenry would make a great Speaker of the House, or it was earlier in October in his speech. He says he's not looking for a job. What is the vision for it? Is there anyone who can lead? Is he an alternative?
Look, I think what you're seeing right now among the Republicans in the House is a direct result of the decisions that Kevin McCarthy made to embrace Donald Trump, to embrace the most radical and extreme members of our party, to elevate them. So it's not a surprise that we are where we are, but it's a disgrace and it's an embarrassment. And there certainly are serious people among the Republicans. I hope that one of them, particularly, I think it's important somebody not be an election denier. And I also think everybody should be asked tomorrow night at the candidate forum about this issue of Ukraine assistance. And they should be asked from the perspective of, We face a global challenge, an existential threat, and how in the world could anybody defend at this moment surrendering to one of our adversaries by walking away from Ukraine?
What do you think is driving the domestic threats against lawmakers within the Republican Party and also among some Democrats?
The domestic threats are absolutely being driven by Donald Trump and unfortunately some of his supporters who, in fact, have encouraged and taken steps that have resulted in, as we saw on January 6th, political violence. When you have a member of Congress, reportedly, like Warren Davidson from Ohio, who in the meeting with Jim Jordan last week, when some of the holdouts raised with Jordan the fact that they were getting death threats, one of them told me that in response, Congressman Davidson said, well, that's not Jim Jordan's fault, that's your fault for voting against him. That is the kind of encouragement and acceptance of violence that is absolutely has no place in this party, should have no place in our country. It is.
Congressman, it's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We'll be back.
This long to
We'll be right back with a rare interview with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Stay with us.
Trust First Alert Weather. We see storms first.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has not done many interviews this year, but he invited us to Capitol Hill Friday to talk about President Biden's request to Congress for more than $100 billion in aid for Ukraine, Israel, and U.S. border security. And that's where our conversation began.
We have big power competition from China, from Russia, and we still have terrorism problems as the Israelis have certainly experienced in a brutal way in the last week. So I think it requires a worldwide approach rather than trying to take parts of it out. It's all connected.
What did he say last week?
We have big power competition from China, from Russia, and we still have terrorism problems as the Israelis have certainly experienced in a brutal way in the last week. So I think it requires a worldwide approach rather than trying to take parts of it out. It's all connected. The Chinese and the Russians said they're now friends forever. Uranium drones are being used in Ukraine and against the Israelis.
There's resistance among some Republicans, including here in the Senate, about bundling things together. Is it possible to pass Ukraine aid if it's not tied to Israel?
I just think that's a mistake. I mean, I know there are some Republicans in the Senate and maybe more in the House that think Ukraine is somehow different. I view it as all interconnected.
And you've said that you believe there is enough oversight of aid to Ukraine. Why hasn't that persuaded some members of the Republican caucus?
If you look at the Ukraine assistance, let's talk about where the money's really going. A significant portion of it's being spent in the United States in 38 different states, replacing the weapons that we send to Ukraine with more modern weapons. So we're rebuilding our industrial base.
That's what President Biden's seeking to do.
It's correct. No Americans are getting killed in Ukraine. We're rebuilding our industrial base. The Ukrainians are destroying the army of one of our biggest rivals. I have a hard time finding anything wrong with that. I think it's wonderful that they're defending themselves. And also the notion that the Europeans are not doing enough.
They probably see it as two different things on a military scale, that they're getting rid of the old, that's basically obsolete, and they're re-reforming into the new. And by them getting rid of the old, rather than them just destroying it, they're giving it to somebody that could actually use it in their defense. That would be That would be what I have come to the conclusions of. I mean, be it as it may, out with the old, in with the new, whatever terminology that you want to use. But it's all an exchange of the opposite of peace, regardless whether it's coming from the Russian government, President Putin, or now over in the Middle East. And God only knows what's going to erupt between now and the next 2 weeks from now that we don't even know nothing about yet. You know, you figure 2.5 weeks ago, we didn't know that this was going to happen over in the Middle East. But you have to look at it logically of the fact that the Bible has already predicted this. It's already given us a heads up in what was going to occur and how that it was going to occur in the final last days. So it's actually something beyond human control in regards towards these supernatural movements that are now being released upon the planet that we're going to see manifestations of, regardless whether we like it or not.
$90 billion. They're housing a bunch of refugees who escaped. I think that our NATO allies in Europe have done quite a lot.
I don't like to see bloodshed. I've said all along, pertaining to the Windmill Ministries missions here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, 03255, I've said all along that if things would have been dealt with properly, pertaining to the ministry, pertaining to a spiritual revival leading to a revolution, we would now all be in the atmosphere of the very opposite of what we are right now, pertaining to the school shootings, the violence, all the illegal immigrants coming over the border, all the drugs, all the gun violence, being $30+ trillion in debt, recently going through COVID, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We would have already be living in some form of life, according to the Bible. This ain't according to me. Of peace, because you cannot take peace from the planet unless there's peace upon the planet to take. That's the point that I've been trying to make now for 30+ years, and nobody wanted to listen to me. Nobody wanted to support me. Nobody wanted to invest in me. Nobody wanted to back me. So because of it, this thing has turned into a wild, wild west show, not just here on this continent, but on all 7 continents all over the world. And it's only escalating. It's only increasing. It ain't decreasing. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. And I'm telling you right now, once it reaches a level of uncertainty the same as it did during the era of Noah, that's whenever the Heavenly Father will throw in the towel and say, you know what? They really are doomed. They're doomed, just like the bunch of people that Noah preached to for, I guess, almost 100 years or better. That this was what was going to occur if you do not change your ways. And guess what? They didn't change their ways. And the things that Noah was telling them occurred. Once God makes a decision that we are now over the threshold, we have crossed over the Rubicon to the point of no return. Get ready. I repeat, get ready for the inedible, pertaining to God coming back in flames of fire, taking vengeance upon them who know not him, and upon them who obey not the gospel, towards burning down every structure upon this planet that can be burnt. It says in the Bible, see thou hurt not the oil nor the wine, but the rest of these elements will be burnt. You think that you're going through horror. You think that you're going through misery. You think that you're going through abstract, difficult situations in your life, in which I'm sure that a lot of people are, especially those that have recently been touched by so much tragedy in the world. regardless whether it's man-made tragedy or the forces of nature tragedy. I'm sure that there's so many people right now that probably feel like that they're already in great tribulation. But that is not great tribulation. That is a form of great tribulation. Whenever great tribulation occurs, that will happen on a global scale. It won't just be one continent. It won't just be one state or one community or one country. It will be all the above. And the world has never seen this before. And these are the things that the Bible has already foretold and warned us about again and again and again that people wanted to disregard. A matter of fact, whenever I took a picture of a cartoon character type artist portrait of myself to LaGrange, Kentucky, and hung it on the wall, and the doctor looked at it, he thought that I was absolutely in another time warp. And that doctor, because of what was going on in Trigg County regarding a few individuals in Land Between the Lakes, Dwayne Camry, Gary Hawkins, Lisa Hawkins, just a few people up there in LBL in Western Kentucky. Because of that, the doctor ordered for me to be put on Risperdal. I didn't want to take it. I was forced to take it. I was ordered by the judge to take it, that if I didn't take it voluntarily, that I was going to take it involuntarily, even if they had to strap me down to the gurney and intravenously put it in my veins or pumping up whatever hole or device that they could put it in. The only time that they were supposed to have done anything like that was under the pretense of me being violent or a danger to myself or a danger to others. And they violated that principle in the state of Kentucky. And from then on, I swelled up like a bullfrog. I went from 220 to 320 in less than about 30 days. And since then, I've been fighting and struggling with being overweight since then. Why? Because I was trying to help them people. Telling them the end is near. The end is near. The end is coming. Not only didn't nobody want to listen, not only did nobody want to support the ministry that God had called me into, but they was actually attacking me because of it. And that was on a legal and a medical scale up there at that particular situation in my life. I can tell you event after event after event that I can prove on paper of attacks again and again and again, beginning in 1983 in my life in Kenton, Tennessee, over here in Obion County, just because I was talking about the Antichrist, the one world government, the New World Order, the opening of the seals, the two witnesses, etc., etc., etc. I have been punished since two hands miraculously come out of heaven and spared my life whenever I should have got cut completely in half in 1983 by 1979 Buick Regal. Lost almost 9 units of blood in less than 45 minutes. I knew that without a shadow of a doubt that a miracle would happen in my life, even if you didn't even believe in God. Even if you was agnostic or an atheist, you had to look at the fact that, my God, this man right here, he must have something going on. We need to listen to him or take his advice or something, because he's got something going in his favor. Did any of the people around here in Northwest Tennessee do that? No. No. A matter of fact, they went just the opposite direction. I don't know if they was jealous. I don't know if they was stupid. I don't know if they was just mean-hearted. But whenever you have a group of people that basically whenever you have a miracle like that occurs, and then they not only want to deny the miracle that occurred, but now they want to persecute the person that's telling them about the miracle. That should speak volumes, my friends, about the type of society that I've been dealing with now for the past 40 years. Since 1983. Since two hands miraculously come out of heaven and saved my life, since I made a telephone call to the White House pertaining to the Antichrist. My life has been totally in disarray from that moment on, because up until that time, I've never been involved in any type of medical problems pertaining to any psychiatric mental problems. I'd had some accidents. I'd had some close encounters of death that once more I can prove. And if anybody should have been mentally evaluated and put on some sort of drugs pertaining to him not being able to control his anger management issues, and I'm pretty sure probably about 25% of the community around here, as well as some of them in Kenton and some of them in Sharon, Tennessee, that knowed my dad, they would verify that, yes, Bobby had a temper. My dad. He would absolutely fly off the deep end. He would come unhinged to the point that he would become a vicious animal just for maybe a few seconds or maybe a few minutes. But then after he simmered down, he was all right. He would want to take you down to the store and buy you a cold drink and give you a candy bar and act like everything was hunky-dory and you wasn't supposed to remember none of it. That is a sickness. That is called post-traumatic stress disorder, in addition to him turning his back on God and basically allowing for the demonic figure to come into his body and destroy his family that way. And the people around here in the area, that most part of them are dead now, the biggest majority of them are dead, but some of them are still alive, that hung around my two older brothers, never lifted a finger. They acted like it was taboo to pick up the phone and call the Weakley County Sheriff's Department out here in Weakley County, the same county that we live in. Nobody, I never seen a truant officer come to my house. Never. Out of all the beatings, never seen a truant officer come to our home. And it wasn't until I reached the age of about 16, I started working for myself. I had an old truck, 1953 Chevrolet truck that I was going to restore. And finally, I convinced my mother, because at that time she only had one son to have to take care of versus 4, because back then you didn't have near the help coming from the state or the government that you do today. So she was caught in between a hard place and a rock, in damned if you do and damned if you don't, simply because she allowed herself to come down to Tennessee, and simply because she did not stop the aggression, the violence, whenever it first started. As the old saying goes, if you give somebody an inch, they're going to take a mile. Well, that's exactly what old Bob done. He took a mile. And he wasn't just doing it in behind the 4 doors and keeping it concealed. They was doing it openly. I mean, whenever you drag somebody out of an automobile by the hair of the head, my older brother down at Hop-In store, and probably about 20 people down there was witnessing it, and nobody even so much as even cared about what was happening to my older brother. And I could go through event after event after event that I know was done publicly. Not privately, but publicly. You have to ask yourself the question, what the hell has happened to the people here in America in condition or versus the good people like Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and Lewis and Clark, and I could go on and on and on with names that help to establish America towards America being what I used to think America was. So the persecution that comes from the Antichrist, from the demonic kingdom, has only increased in I guess the past 40, 50 years. I tend to wonder that the stepping stone that made us turn was long about Halloween, whenever they started putting razor blades in candy and started poisoning children openly, and they started tampering around with medicine bottles, Tylenol and stuff like that, and putting cyanide capsules in medicine containers, to the degree that the whole medical industry had to change their whole format in putting seals on all their medications. That was a movement that began long about the mid-70s. just shortly after the Woodstock era. The Beatles, Elvis. You know, we want to look at other groups like Ozzy Osbourne, and we want to look at other groups like the Grateful Dead. We want to look at other hardcore groups and rap groups and stuff like that. That's not where it began. That's not where all this began. All this began whenever a man was assassinated right on national TV down in Dallas, Texas, in the early 60s. And that's whenever things started going backwards, pertaining to our methods, pertaining to our morals, and pertaining to our means. And now, 60 years later, look where we are.
You sound like you have a lot in common with President Biden and his worldview, based on what you just laid out.
Well, not on the domestic side, but on this issue that we were discussing today, we're generally in the same place.
On the issue of Israel, that does seem to be a unifying issue for many Republicans. And I want to ask you about this $10 billion request the president is making. Do you think there need to be any provisions in there that would account for the risk of human rights violations in Gaza?
Well, we want to make sure we're not sending money to Hamas, I can tell you that. But there are genuine humanitarian needs for the people in Gaza who are not Hamas, who've been thrown under the bus by what Hamas did, innocent people. But we want to be careful about how the money is spent, be sure it actually gets where it's supposed to get.
For any military aid that's going to Israel right now, do you think there need to be strings attached?
Israel's our strongest ally in the world. We trust them, and we have a very tight relationship with them, both on the intelligence side and the military side. So I don't think the kind of oversight we're talking about for Ukraine, for example, would be necessary for Israel.
You know, to do all of these things, you need a partner in Congress. Senator Welch said you are the only Republican negotiator right now because of all the disarray in the House. How can you deliver on this at a time when you're saying it's essential?
Well, I hope we're going to have a speaker sometime soon. And
before November 17th?
We need one. We need one because the House can't do anything without a speaker. And it's a problem, but I hope it's going to get solved pretty quickly.
Is there anyone in the House?
And you can hope in one hand and poo-poo in the other and see which one fills up the quickest. Our government services pertaining to our officials are failing the American people and have been failing the American people now for quite some time. And that's really the bottom line. You can try to make it up. You can try to paint it up. You can try to camouflage it all you want. But the bottom line is this. Our American government officials have failed to provide safety and prosperity for its own people.
Who can lead the Republicans?
Look, I'm not an expert in the House. I have my hands full here in the Senate, and we're going to do our job and hope the House can get functional here sometime soon.
There is no current U.S. ambassador to Israel right now. And some of your Republican colleagues have voiced concerns about President Biden's nominee. Do you have concerns about Jack Lew?
He is a very controversial nominee because of his relationship with the Iran nuclear deal, which was opposed by everybody in my party. And by the way, I hope that flirtation with Iran is finally over with regard to the nuclear deal. And Senator Cotton and I also have a bill to freeze the $6 billion that was on the way to the Iranians in relation to the hostage release.
Well, it's in Qatar, and the White House says Iran hasn't been able to make any withdrawals from it.
Yeah, but we'd like to make it law so that it can't be undone. Look, I think we need to get tougher with Iran, and I do think the weakness of both the Obama administration and the Biden administration is the thought that somehow we could do business with Iran on something. And I think it's pretty clear we can't. I mean, they're funding Hezbollah, Hamas, creating problems all over the Middle East, and we shouldn't be doing any business with them.
President Biden said he's going to hold Iran accountable. What do you think that means?
I think the proof will be, what are we going to do to hold them accountable? And it's got to be credible. You can't, on the one hand, be negotiating with Iran on some kind of nuclear deal that you know they won't keep, and then turn around and declare that you're going to get tougher with Iran. I think, number one, quit talking to the Iranians about any kind of nuclear deal. Number two, don't give them the $6 billion. And number three, back up the Israelis in every conceivable way after this attack by Iran-sponsored Hamas.
You oppose all diplomacy with Iran.
It's not a question of whether you ever talk to them or not, but it's a question of what do you do? What do you do? And clearly, the nuclear deal that the Obama administration agreed to and that the Biden administration tried to connect is not the way to go. There's an axis of evil in the world: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And we need to stand up to the axis of evil, not try to do business with them.
Exactly. You can't compromise with the devil. The devil is unconformable. You're not going to conform Lucifer or the traits of Lucifer. This warfare began thousands of years ago whenever God had to kick him out of heaven. You can't conform something that's unconformable. I think that's the part that the American people has been in denial about for years and years and years, and they have tried to put Band-Aids on this thing. They have tried to clean it up. They've tried to compromise it. They've tried to do other things in sending so much resources over to the Middle East, so many Bibles, so many missionaries, so many good, hardcore, decent Christians have went over there and tried to reform them and teach them the differences between a heathenistic, barbaric way versus a civilized way. And what did we get in return? What did we get in return? The American people has not gotten the bang for the buck. Just like going over to Afghanistan, the same thing. Going to go over there and try to reform a group of people and spend something like $3 trillion in 10 years in trying to reform them people. And they thought that we had it all under control until we walked out. Less than about 11 days later, what do those same people do that we spent all that money and time on? They laid down and surrendered. And today, the Taliban is in control of those people's lives. Sometimes you just got to let nature play itself out. And as cruel and as harsh as it may sound, by and large, those people are getting what they deserved and are deserving, because it was God that restricted his blessings up onto that great area over there after they crucified his son. And because they rejected the teachings of Jesus pertaining to him being the Messiah, the only begotten Son, basically a curse has fell up onto that area, and they have been at war more so after Christ than it was before Jesus Christ. Now, there's been certain times that we've settled them down. There's been certain times that we've managed to put a Band-Aid on something. There's been certain times that we've actually been able to talk to them people in thinking that we was making headway with them. But now, proof is in the pudding, and not only that our United States military works was in vain in Afghanistan, but now look at all the stuff that we've been involved in over in the Middle East that's now blowing up in our faces. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see this. You don't have to have a graduate degree in Yale or Harvard. You don't have to be some kind of university professor to understand what's going on here. It's the works of evil. It is a spiritual, demonic, supernatural force that is working through these people. And it talks about that over in Daniel pertaining to the Persian Empire over there, the evil empire over there, that's been at work for years and years, thousands of years, even before Jesus Christ, during the time of Daniel, whenever the hand wrote on the wall, the Persian Empire, that Christ talks about in Revelations with John the Revelator, that even God hates those who profess to be Jews and those that worship Baal, and I don't forget now what the other name of it was. Basically, a disguised demonic figure, an imposter. And that's exactly what has been over there all this time, and that's the reason why God lifted his blessings from that area. And now they got nothing but a sandbox to live in. I don't even know that they can grow a potato unless they do it artificially with irrigation systems and stuff like that. It's unbelievable how them people have turned their backs upon the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. Even 2,000 plus years later, they still, by and large, have rejected the Lord's teachings and who Jesus Christ actually is. There's only a few Orthodox Jews, Messianic Jews, who have given their lives over to Christ and understands the teachings of Jesus Christ was in fact authentic, and they have received and accepted Jesus as being their Lord and Savior, rather than just a prophet or a good man with good teachings. There's been only a few, and whenever I say a few, I'm talking about probably less than 1%. And that's just in the Jewish sector. Now you spread it across the board in all them other sectors, the percent level even goes down even further. So yeah, we're dealing with something that we've been dealing with now for basically hundreds of years on one form or one fashion or the other. And today, because of modernization, because of the satellite, internet, TVs, media, etc., now it's right up underneath our noses. Now it's basically in our backyards. And people can say whatever they want to say towards, oh, that's their affairs. That's not going to bother us. I promise you, if this thing was to explode the way that I'm thinking that it could possibly explode, in the degree that they start blowing up them oil fields, all that stuff over there, in retaliation, in trying to vindicate one another pertaining to what they're involved in, you will see a very substantial increase in the gasoline that you are now putting in your automobiles. In addition to what that will affect other prices pertaining to transporting prices. I mean, even mail today is like, I guess, 1,000% more than what it was even like 10 years ago. I can't believe that it costed me $47 to send 9 pounds to another state, and wasn't but clothes and toys. 9 pounds. $7 for the box and packing, and $40 for the shipment. That's how much FedEx and UPS have gone up. Now you wonder, well, they were striking this year, wasn't they? Yeah, they sure was. And people said, well, that ain't none of our concern. That's their doings. Well, guess what? Their doings has affected you, especially if you mail a package today. That's the point that I'm trying to make. people don't realize that we're so intricately connected today, regardless whether we be on this continent or another continent. I guess the only people that it wouldn't really affect would be the people that's still living in third world villages and countries, and people like down at the Amazon forest, the Mayans, and people like that that refuses to become adapted to the 21st century ways. People that's living up in the mountains that's already decided that they was going to live off grid. There's only a few people today, once more, probably less than 2%, that the world affairs does not affect everybody, regardless whether it be on this side of the planet or the other.
I want to ask you as well about the moment here in Washington that we are in. A number of members of Congress, including Representatives Miller Meeks, Ferguson, Bacon, Ken Buck, have said just this week that they have had death threats against them. How concerned are you about violence against lawmakers working here?
Well, I think there have been more threats lately, and
just heard this morning where a sheriff's son went berserk up in Nashville and shot 2 deputies. Just heard, as of this morning, a judge got shot and killed in the state of Maine. I don't know what it was about. So, whatever this man's going to answer to, let's listen.
About it.
Are you concerned about more political violence going into an election year here?
Look, I think since 9/11 and January 6th, we've had heightened security here at the Capitol. I'm sure we're a target for all kinds of evildoers, both in the United States and abroad.
I'm glad he answered that way. He answered a very smart way.
And abroad.
People wonder about your health. How are you feeling? How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm completely recovered and just fine.
You and your office felt the need to share and disclose some of the details about your health because of some of these public incidents. And the doctor here said there was no evidence of Parkinson's disease or a stroke or a seizure. And I wonder, is there anything the public should know that wasn't disclosed?
I'm in good shape, completely recovered, and back on the job.
So does that mean that you think you are able to continue serving and you want to continue serving here at a time when we are talking about incredible dysfunction in Washington?
I'm going to ask the question even in a more poignancy way. Do we believe that people like this can serve under the leadership that they're under and perform at 100%? The answer to that question would be absolutely no. Just based upon their age criteria. And I don't mean to be prejudiced against nobody that's old, because I myself is old. But there comes a time whenever you pull the football quarterback out of the team and put him in the pasture and let him live out the rest of his life. There comes a time whenever a horse himself can no longer adequately perform. There comes a time that you got to take the vehicle and basically put it in the junkyard. Everything has a life expectancy to it. And that's something that Washington, D.C. has failed to recognize towards giving 100% to we, the people. I ain't trying to be judgmental. I ain't trying to degrade nobody. But the facts is the facts. And these people that get in power and think that they've got a lifelong position. This man right here is worth several $1 million. I think the last time I looked, it was like right around $100 million. And this is a politician that's supposed to be working for we the people. Why his finances are getting stronger, ours is getting weaker, and we're going to ask this individual that can't hardly keep a straight face and remain coherent while doing interviews if he is at his best? Get real.
You're talking about what we were talking about earlier rather than my health.
You've made clear you have a lot of policy disagreements with the former president, Donald Trump. Doesn't it trouble you that he is the front runner for the Republican nomination, given the questions he has raised about aid for Ukraine, for example?
I'm not going to comment on the various candidates for president on either side.
I see. Wish-washy. Crawfishing. Refusing to answer the question. Why? Because he's afraid that if he's truthful with the question, it will backfire on him in the party. So in reality, he's not up there working for we the people. He's up there to satisfy his party. And I can basically say the same thing with a lot of your preachers, especially here in the Bible Belt area. And I'm sure a lot of them had good intentions, but by and large, they're not in it to win it pertaining to the scriptures coming from the eternal holy God and the Lord Jesus Christ. They're in it because of the group of people that they have been associated with, and in actuality, their influences have come from that particular group of people, regardless whether it was Methodist, Church of Christ, Catholics, Presbyterians, Methodists, Jehovah's Witness, or whatever. They're in it for the group versus in it for the Lord Jesus Christ. And I've seen that again and again and again. And a lot of people have been turned off of going to any church, because of this bad behavior that obviously it's just not me that can see, but others too as well. That has basically stained the very house of God. It has stained the house of God because you got so many people out there that actually believe, and they would love to be influenced, and they would love to know more of the teachings and the prophecies out of the Bible, but because of the leadership that they're seeing, they ain't going to have nothing to do with the Baptists. They ain't going to have nothing to do with the Church of Christ. They ain't going to have nothing to do with the Assembly of God. They ain't going to have nothing to do with the Second Baptist. They ain't going to have nothing to do with the Presbyterians or the Catholics or none of the above. Because they can see through them. Just like right now, sitting here right now, listening to this interviewer and this man refusing to answer any questions about this particular subject matter. What does that tell you? Proof is in the pudding. It's kind of like answering a question with a question, which is not an answer. The people deserve better than this. The people deserve better than this.
I've got my hands full here in the Senate.
Former Secretary of Defense Gates told us this is one of the most dangerous moments that he has ever seen for our country. And we're talking about the basic functioning of our democracy being a problem right now.
Well, wasn't there a congressman or senator shot at in Washington, D.C.? Look what happened just within the past few years over in Tucson, Arizona. And there's been other cases pertaining to judges, politicians in general, that have come very, very close in scathing death because of certain individuals out there that didn't like them. Look what happened January the 6th with all the voting counters. Look what happened to a lot of the people that was trying to do the best of their will for the will of the people. And that all come back to them to the point that they was getting death threats. And some of them, I don't know, some of them may have actually gotten harmed or hurt. And if you don't get harmed and hurt physically, you can get harmed and hurt psychologically and emotionally and spiritually. There's all kinds of ways that a human being can be hurt.
Now, I'll ask you again, who can lead the Republican Party, not just in the House, but to deliver on the vision that you are laying out here?
Typically, it's the candidate for president when you have a presidential election who becomes obviously the most visible person in your party. And we don't know who that's going to be yet. In the meantime, we have divided government. We have a job to do. The election's not until next year. Dabbling in the presidential election is something I'm just not going to do. I don't think it's productive.
We're not in typical moments. We're not in typical moments like it was back during the era of Carter, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Clinton's. This thing has gone backwards. We're not no longer dealing with typical, everyday, normal occurrences. That's another reason why people like old Mitch really don't have no business being up there doing an interview explaining to we the people of the needs and the likes and the dislikes that are beneficial to the Americans. And I would say that if that was my own grandfather up there. I'd say that if that was me up there at the age of 62. There comes a time whenever reality needs to be slapped in the face of the intelligent people down here and understanding that they're not getting the bang for their buck. Kind of like the difference between a fresh horse and an old horse. If you've been riding an old horse for the past 10 years, obviously the old horse is probably going to act like an old horse. It's going to have characteristics of an old horse. Oh, it may still get you there. It may still get you to point A to point B. But is it going to get you there in a sufficient, adequate time that obviously the old horse ain't going to be able to do? Now, in some cases, wisdom is actually better than youth, providing that it's the right wisdom. But whenever you have people in office that once more are in there for the sake of themselves and the sake of their party versus the sake of the people, then obviously that's not wisdom. That's called BS. That's not wisdom. Not whenever it comes to running a nation as great as this nation is. And the people need to wake up to that. There's been a few older candidates, and I'm just going to use Ronald Reagan for a throwout. J.F. Hoover, other people during the times of crises pertaining to what the people was going through, that has made some leaps and bounds and contributions towards trying to straighten things out that had obviously went in the wrong direction. Even as good as what Ronald Reagan was in rebuilding the structure of our military back, he's still done some things that has costed us today in what we're looking at towards being $33 trillion in debt. And one of those things was taking the security away from the good old American dollar bill that used to be backed by gold bullion. Whenever they done that, you set a sail in a trajectory that was unknown to humanity that now we are beginning to know the consequences on account of. Whenever you take God out of school, whenever you tell parents that they can no longer discipline their children appropriately. I'm not saying that any of them need to be beaten because I am against child abuse because I was abused as a child. But there has to be reasonable, logical, sensible people if we're going to get out of the mess that obviously a great deal of these politicians that are still in power put us in. These are the people that put us in these positions. Like Nancy Pelosi being in there for 40 plus years. It's unbelievable in how intentionally stupid, I guess the right word would be. You can't use the word ignorant. Ignorant means you don't know no better. Stupid means that you done something stupid and you know not to do it and you still done it anyway. That fits under the category of being stupid. But whenever you continue to keep doing something stupid again and again and again, now it changes from that category to being into another category. And you know what that category is? Insanity. Insanity. I learned that from going to various AA meetings that I didn't have to go to. I wasn't ordered to go to because, fortunately, God prevented from me ever becoming an all out and out hardcore alcoholic or a drug addict. Even though I dabbled around with some stuff that I shouldn't have never dabbled around with whenever I was a teenager growing up. But I've went to these meetings and I've heard what they say pertaining to a higher force. And in most part, they will give the illustration that a person that continues to do the same thing again and again, that expects different results of, though they're doing the same thing, is a sign of insanity. I've heard that in a great deal of meetings that I have been in pertaining to people that had these type of issues. And you know what? I've looked at it and looked at it and looked at it, and in more ways than one, they have nailed it on the head. Because if you continue to do what you know not to be doing, and every time you do it, it gets you in trouble, then in essence, you have no one to blame but yourself. Because you never learnt by the first, second, third, sometimes the 10th, the 20th example. You're still thriving towards thinking that you're going to get over the hill or you're going to get lucky towards hitting a lotto or whatever, and you continue to keep circulating just like a dog returning back to its vomit, is what the Bible says. And until you can purify the heart and purify the mind, which requires purifying the soul towards going to the altar and allowing for the Holy Spirit to take leadership of your life, you will be moving, but you will not be going nowhere, just like an animal chasing after its tail, going around and around in circles, but ultimately is not going nowhere. Thank you. Good luck to each and every one of us in these unusual, abnormal, hostility moments that not only the people in Israel pertaining to the Jewish people, but basically the Christian society all over the planet. And I can validate that towards what I've went through just within the past 9 years right here, coming back to Northwest Tennessee. But we need to pray for one another, and we need to help one another during this great time of uprising, this evil uprising that is not just happening in the Middle East. It's not just happening in different spots here in America, but it's happening all over the planet. And I've been trying to tell people that again and again and again, that we've been under siege now for, I guess, the past 5 or 6 years, ever since Donald Trump basically become president. Into about halfway of his presidency, I've been telling people we are under siege based upon what the Bible says in the last days in Revelations, that Satan will come down in great wrath because it or he knoweth his time is short. I've been putting out advisory after advisory, warning after warning, and I get no positive response at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. Have a good day. Thank you very much. God bless our troops. God bless America. God bless our endeavors. And please, please pray for the people right now that are going through so much horror over in the Holy Land. And pray for the Christians and pray for one another. God bless. Heaven help us all, and shalom.